I'm here on the exhibitor floor of the Global Energy Show in Calgary, Alberta. I'm joined today by Stephen Buffalo. He is the president and CEO of the Indian Resource Council of Canada, an organization that advocates for Indigenous participation in the oil and gas industry and oil and gas. Anything beyond that, or?
Well, obviously things have kind of elevated to pipelines, energy of all sorts, renewable, but ultimately we're created based on the advocacy for the First Nations that produce oil and gas. Yeah.
Right on. Well, why don't you tell me just briefly about yourself, a bit more about your organization, and what you're doing here today at the Global Energy Show.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me and doing this interview. I appreciate it. I'm from the Samson Cree Nation, Musqueam, Alberta, but I've been in Calgary for over 20 years, and the oil and gas sector is really prominently the driver of our nation, and our work with the Indian Resource Council, we work with the First Nations that have produced oil and gas. So we advocate with industry, we advocate with the province, and obviously federally. From our organization was born the Indian Oil and Gas Canada, who is our regulator for on-reserve oil and gas production. And we've been working with that special operating agency under the Indigenous Services Canada to really help manage our lands, protect our resources, and help manage our oil and gas royalties. So a lot of work there, and then on top of that, also I'm the chairman of the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, which provides loan guarantee backstop to First Nations participating in energy infrastructure projects.
Well, so I don't forget about it. We'll come back to the bigger stuff with the Indian Resource Council, but let's talk about the Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. That was brought in the previous government, during the Kenney government. Was it around the second year of that government, so around 2020?
Yeah, about there, yeah. It was about 8 years ago, yeah.
Okay, so so we're 2019, 2020. It's off and running now. What do you think have been kind of the big successes that have come out of that?
Well, definitely there was a need, and the minister, the premier of the day, Jason Kenney, great guy, very aggressive, and he saw the need that First Nations needed to be a part of the infrastructure, to avoid, any court battles, more or less, and it was paying homage to our rights, landholders title, and it really gave us an opportunity to generate our own wealth. It's very important. Mm-hmm. So, to date, we've backstopped 7 deals, and we're just over $800 million in backstop. We do have a limit of $3 billion, and of course, the proponents are coming forward. New initiatives are coming forward, and it's just a matter of doing our due diligence to make sure that, one, nothing comes back on the government for a loan being called. Secondly, the straight...
It is one of the risks when you get into the
for sure.
Government of the business of business, but yeah.
But definitely, but the thing is, it's a strong mechanism to keep business moving, and again, the fact that First Nations can now generate their own wealth while paying back a loan, is very positive. I feel that, this is the start of something new and innovative which has created other provinces to create their own loan guarantee programs as well. Now there's a national program that's just been recently announced of $10 billion, which is sector agnostic. And how you interpret that?
Sector agnostic.
Sector agnostic.
Sector agnostic, okay. Yeah,
so obviously it's got to make fiscal sense. Mm-hmm. It's got to be debt serviceability. And then the commodity or whatever it is needs to service the debt, obviously. And, so the work that we've done is really amplified the fact that, provinces and obviously our government, federal government, see that, in any way to move forward is Indigenous participation.
Well, what have the challenges been, and have there been any mistakes? There's always mistakes along the way. What are some of the mistakes and challenges you guys have faced?
Well, being a founding board member, we really had to try to establish our feet on the ground and make sure that we had a lot of credibility, and keep up with business and the sector. The one thing that's hard to kind of gauge is what our federal government does as far as federal policy. Bill C-69.
We're talking No More Pipelines Act.
No More Pipelines Act. And of course, on top, you talk about the Bill C-48, and then the greenwashing bill.
So C-48, was that...
Tankerman.
Northwest Coast tanker ban.
Yeah, so takeaway capacity is an issue, and again, look at Alberta and the strength that it has. We need to move the bitumen, and of course now we're faced with an emissions cap, which really is a productions cap. Our communities still produce oil and gas, and it's going to be a challenge as well. From 30,000 feet, it's hard to attract investment, knowing that there could be issues with emissions cap on production. So it's challenges all around, not just with Indigenous, but mainstream society.
You lead an interesting, I guess, two organizations, but they have a similar mandate.
Yeah.
There's a lot of overlap. We've got a cardboard cutout of Stephen Guilbeault over here. Can we pan the camera to? Let's see if we could. Let's pan the camera. Let's bring the environment minister into this debate. Let's see. Yeah, we've got Trudeau's environment minister Stephen Guilbeault here now. Mark Carney is Minister of Canadian Identity.
Yep.
They've tried, that side, the anti-resource development side, has really tried with a fair degree of success, I think, to try to paint Indigenous Canadians as implacably and effectively universally and unanimously opposed to major resource development projects,
right.
Using them, for lack of a better term, as props.
Right.
He's a prop. It's Stephen Guilbeault, our cardboard cutout, is a prop, I guess.
Yep.
But trying to use Indigenous Canadians as props to support their political agenda.
Right.
I would imagine Indigenous Canadians, like any other Canadians, have people on both sides of an issue.
Yep.
They're not going to be entirely one way or the other.
Yep.
How much of a challenge have you found it with the Indian Resource Council, the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, to kind of cut against that narrative?
Well, it's important. National resource development is important to First Nations. First off, we have the Indian Act, which I call soft communism. So we have to find mechanisms to get away from that. And of course, there's many First Nations that support the development as long as they get in a peace. Now, when you bring the issues of the UNDRIP and the treaty rights, the first free, prior, informed consent has a price tag. And industry and the governments know that. Mm-hmm. And of course, if we want to continue to build our economies, we have to address those issues. And consultation is a big piece of it. And of course, we have the people that want to protect the environment, be it if it's from their wholehearted self-interest to do that, good on them, because it's a good reminder that when we exploit our resources, there's huge environmental disruption, no doubt about it. There's still a carbon footprint of some sort, and of course everyone's worried about the emissions, but our strength is, one, the technology is getting better to address the emissions thing. The one thing that I want to make sure Canadians understand is when some of the nations protest, it might not be from their home territory. It could be a funded ENGO that kind of steps into play here. And when the federal government talks about foreign interference at the election political level, there's also foreign interference from foundations from the United States to make sure that, we're landlocked. Yeah. And unfortunately, some of our people take advantage of that, and it's given them a little bit of resources with money and to do that, but to me it's not the right representation. If we're really going to be treaty people, if we're really going to share the land, we have to be open to these opportunities as well. But keep in mind, if the proponents and governments work with the First Nations to address that issue, and have a fair deal, and look at resource revenue sharing, not only in its past impact benefit agreements, its past infrastructure ownership and equity. This resource revenue sharing is really going to change the dynamic and really get us off federal dependency under the Indian Act. So, the representation of guys like him is kind of misconstrued, and I hope Canadians can see past some of that, because a lot of First Nations want to see the development go through, and as long as they're a part of it.
All right, I got a tough one for you.
Sure.
And it's going to flow from what you said. You talked about consent has a price.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about maybe where you think consent is required, consultation, where consultation is required. Alberta's a bit neater because we have treaties. We have clear treaties for all Alberta territory. British Columbia is a lot less neat. A lot of unceded territory where ancestral land is claimed, but it's not. It's a lot. It's pretty murky. You know, I think if it's impacting on land, consultations required. But do you think, do First Nations have a veto over this, or is it they have to be not just on paper, but genuinely and thoughtfully and sincerely consulted? You know, where do you draw the line about where consultation starts and a veto ends?
Yeah, for sure, and it's a really tough question, and I appreciate it as we're going around this. And even prior to the UNDRIP and treaties, the treaty has been set in precedent at the Supreme Court of Canada. So recognizing Indigenous right and title is already there, But you fast forward it to now with under the FPIC and the consent, and do First Nations have a veto? It looks like it. It says it does, because at the end of the day, there's ways to stop the development. But again, with the proper consultation and listening to the grassroots people, listening to the leaders of their concerns on why they feel it's not, that's where industry and governments have to kind of address and maybe make some amendments. But again, if the deal is fair, and you're seeing solid revenues back to the nation, just past, measly payments, I think that's a better way as addressing that whole issue on veto. It'll take some time, and then given the time frame that your Prime Minister has given us in regards to...
You keep on calling him my Prime Minister. He's not mine either. Stop calling him that.
To the one...
We were doing this before the camera was on, too. Stop calling him my Prime Minister.
Well, he's brought forward the One Canadian Economy Act, right? Yeah. And of course, it's the fast track some of these infrastructure projects. So that's exciting. But again, the consultation piece has to really be addressed. Mm-hmm. And again, part of that can be disclosing some of these issues where the foreign interference is coming. I can honestly say, we have to kind of support the greater good. If 300 nations support a project and one is opposed, we have to work with the one that it's being opposed. And if that's more capacity, if that's more understanding, if that's making a deal that really impacts, that addresses their concern, we have to go through that and make amendments.
It's freebie. I don't remember the name of them off the top of my head. It was the West Coast, BC-based First Nations have names that are really difficult for me. The Alberta ones I'm pretty good with. Even Masquachis, that's one of the tougher ones, and I can get that.
Yeah.
Some of the BC ones
they're very difficult.
A lot of apostrophes and Q's. It's tough. But it was one of the ones that was thought to be most opposed to Northern Gateway and whatnot. The elected chief was in favor, but then we had so-called hereditary chiefs opposed to it. Digging into it, we found some of these hereditary chiefs don't seem to have much of a claim, but I mean, and it's not entirely parallels, but I mean, it's like, well, if the Queen of England thinks one thing, but the Prime Minister of England thinks another, well, the Prime Minister wins. That's the way that works. But I mean, these are different systems. I get it. But what are your thoughts? Do you know which? Can you name the one I'm talking about?
Wet'suwet'en?
Wet'suwet'en.
Yeah, Wet'suwet'en. Yeah.
Yeah. See, there's 3 apostrophes in there, so it's tough. So, what are your thoughts on hereditary chiefs versus the elected chief and council?
Yeah, it's something that they have to work out internally. My thought is, majority of Canadian First Nations have adopted the democratic process of electing a leader. And in my view, I think that's probably the best thing. The hereditary chieftainship brings a lot of spirituality and ceremony to the work that they're supposed to do in regards to protecting the people and helping the people. And there's a conflict there, obviously, of course. But as mentioned, there are other factors at play that might influence some of those hereditary chiefs. which has been, I think there's some documentation in and around that. But in the same sense, I think it's best we leave it that they kind of work through their own systems and call that stuff with internally until they can come up with a decision. At the end of the day, if there's disclosure on some of these opportunities as to what's being offered to the First Nation, I think the greater will win. Again, I'm a strong supporter of this resource development because we've been stuck on federal dependency, and these are ways to get away from that. We have issues with housing. We have issues with clean water. Our healthcare is not the best. Our education is under the Indian Act. It's horrible. And of course, we see these wildfires now. How are we going to pay for all of that? Some communities the members might be coming back to the community where their house has been completely burned down. How do we address that? We have to be part of the system. We have to make sure not only our governments can make the money, but we can make the money as well.
So where I want to go with this is not necessarily resource on this. This is you as a status Indian, part of your community. In driving distance from Calgary, there are different territories with some are first world, some are third world. Like it's hard to believe these places are in driving distance from each other. They have the same treaty rights. Some of them have maybe different resources on them and whatnot. But I mean, some of them have got different leadership cultures. Right. And I'm an outsider. I don't have any great insight into it. But I've had some interaction. I spent 4 years in the Alberta legislature. I had some interaction here. It's limited. But I could tell some of them just had a very different way of doing things. And I'm not going to name which ones I thought were well run, and I'm not going to name which ones I thought were poorly run. But I think you probably know what I'm talking about.
Oh, definitely.
Within driving distance of Calgary, you can go to some, and it looks like the third world, and others, it's like, wow, these guys have got it going on. They got something right going. If there's no secret bullet here, but if it was up to you, what's the secret sauce you think for empowering First Nations to be able to become less dependent and stand on their own, the way some in driving distance from where we are right here are doing pretty well? What do you think is the big difference between those?
Obviously you hit it on the head. Some leaderships are different, and some of the leaders of the day kind of take the initiatives in certain directions.
But is it also cultures of the different bands? Like that they have different, because they're electing. No. The leaders are often a reflection of, you get the democracy you deserve. Right?
And the only thing that will unite us now is our culture. Even though they're different, we still practice the same way. And I think that's what we have to go back to. And if you're going to change anything right now, because we're all in the same pot when it comes to the federal funding in the Indian Act, like we've all been wronged in certain dynamics of what the federal government and provincial government have done to our communities, to our people. And you're seeing settlements being made right now. For example, the cows and plows under the treaty. Some bands saw some compensation back for the lack of their fulfillment of that obligation. And they're slowly trying to build their economies. And if there's one thing I want to see fixed, is that I think, this Natural Resource Transfer Act, which empowered the provinces to take control of the resources. You go back to the treaty where we're supposed to share, I think things would be different. Building our own capacities and communities will come as they seem fit, because years of being trained under the Indian Act is tough to get out of. And the thing about it is, when we sign that document, we know that money's coming in some capacity. Is it enough? Nowhere near enough. Mm-hmm. But when we look at these other opportunities now with this infrastructure play, and where the federal government wants to go, we have to take advantage of that. And provinces now have to really consider, can we share this resource with the First Nations so that going forward the consent is a little more easier. So that will build the economy of not only the province but of our country.
So, this conversation's gone kind of beyond. It's varying, but I'm enjoying it too much, so I'm going to milk it for everything it's worth. You've been very critical of the Indian Act. You called it soft communism.
Yep.
And there's been criticism of it from very different perspectives. I've seen it from a hard left kind of land back perspective. I've seen it from a more free enterprise perspective, like yourself.
Yep.
Everyone seems to hate it.
Yep.
but it never goes away.
I know.
Like there seems everyone agrees this is terrible. It's soft communism to some, it's soft fascism to others, it's hyper capitalist to others, and colonialist.
Yeah.
Everyone hates it.
Yeah.
But it's still here.
Yeah.
Two questions.
Yeah.
Why is it still here then? If everyone agrees it's terrible, why is it still here?
Yeah.
And two, from your perspective at least,
Yeah.
what do we replace it with? Because I think that's probably why it's still here, is we don't agree what to replace it with.
Well, why it's still here is because it's at least not a guaranteed, but it's a form of revenue to the nation. And we were under this programming that we have to report on, and at least it gives the community some way to address the needs, but it's, again, nowhere near enough because our populations are growing. We need to build more housing, we need to have better schooling, and give opportunity to our younger generation to move. What replaces it again, is creating our own wealth. And again, this whole economy is really, that's how we change the narrative. It's going to take strong leadership, not only at the federal level, not only at the provincial level, but our own communities themselves. They got to realize, how do I get away from depending on this money, because it's just not enough. And again, with these infrastructure projects that are going to be announced hopefully soon, we have to be ready and address some of our issues on concerning, one, first off, is it a good project for us? Two, are we going to be able to take advantage fiscally? And three, is it something more than just equity ownership? Is it, establishing our right and title under treaty with revenue sharing? Mm-hmm. That's the only option that I can see right now. Maybe there's more, but the Indian Act will continue to be there because it's in the Constitution under Section 35, and it really identifies the rights of our people, and that's kind of probably the primary driver why it's still around. But the funding mechanisms and everything else in around that's got to change.
I've never seen a piece of legislation so unanimously panned and hated.
Yeah.
That seems to have zero people really advocating in Parliament to get rid of. We all hate it, and no one speaks up for getting rid of it.
Yeah.
Well, Stephen, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Sharing your time and knowledge with us today. And I guess I'll see you around the rest of the Global Energy Show here. Enjoy
yourself. This is awesome. I really appreciate it. A lot of good dialogue. And, of course, we got countries from around the world here, and if there's anything that Canadians and Albertans we can do, is that we can show we can be an energy superpower if we want to be, but we can't do it without First Nations. I agree. Well, it's glad to have you in. Thank you very much. Yep. All right, that's Stephen Buffalo of the Indian Resource Council. Right on.